Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1938 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Bette Davis won for her performance in Jezebel. But why did she beat fellow nominees Fay Bainter, Wendy Hiller, Norma Shearer, and Margaret Sullavan? We'll explore all this and more on today's episode of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 11th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1938. We'll be discussing why Bette Davis won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And we're already at the second to last episode of the season. Went by very fast. We're almost done with the 30s already. And my guest today is joining me for the first time, actually, but we've been following each other for years on Twitter, I would say, years. He is an illustrator, designer, artist who has actually written books about the Oscars with trivia facts and records and all sorts of goodies in a series called The Big O. Please welcome to the show, Dash Silva.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here.
Yes.
I'm excited. This was an interesting year.
Yes, it certainly was.
Yes.
I actually don't know your opinions on these specific performances, so I'm excited to dive into those.
Yeah.
Later on.
It's generally a good clutch, and I was actually kind of reflecting on those, doing my notes up earlier, that I think based on some of the earlier episodes of the podcast, right, when the early Oscars are a bit chaotic when they're trying to figure out what a winning role is, right? And I feel by this point we've sort of got an idea of what an Oscar winning role is, and what should be. And this lineup of performances feels easier to criticize or judge today.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
But before we dig into 1938, let's talk about Best Actress.
Yes.
As a category, 93 years of history. My first question I always ask my guests, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a list, but I decided to be decisive and pick one, and I was trying to be, a little bit different, not that different. I think I was going to go with Olivia de Havilland for The Heiress, just because she does so much, she transforms, there's just so much in it, the role is really good. My list includes, Maggie Smith, Julia Roberts, a bunch of things which, are in the list, but I think if I had to pick, the one for me, it's Olivia de Havilland. It's the one that, I show everyone to be this is how we're going to judge our friendship. How do you respond to Catherine Sloper?
Wow, I love that. And I feel like all of the performances you listed there are women who just totally dominated their films completely.
Yeah.
So I feel like they're very of a piece, her and Julia Roberts and Maggie Smith.
I'm of the feeling that Best Actress should be Most Actress.
There you go. And they certainly are doing a lot.
Yeah.
Well, my other question on the flip side, there are so many examples of upsetting losses in this category. What's your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
So everyone says Judy Garland in 1954, and that is
been mentioned many times already.
Exactly, and it is the one.
Yes.
It's hard to top it, but I'd say for me, it's probably, and this isn't necessarily because of the loss, but it's the person involved. Rosalind Russell losing in 1947, where she lost to Loretta Young for The Farmer's Daughter, doing that weird, bumbling, cutesy Swedish accent thing. And Rosalind, it's her second of 4 nominations in her career, and she's doing more and becomes Electra, a grim 3-hour Eugene O'Neill play that's miserable, but it's so worthy,
Yeah.
And Rosalind Russell, someone who's very special to me, of people that I think who should have an award, right? Some people it's Barbara Stanwyck, some people it's Deborah Kerr. For me, it's Rosalind Russell. I don't think there's anyone that was ever more talented or funny or just brilliant in films that I don't think is as recognized today as she deserves to be, even though she's pretty well recognized.
That's a very, very good choice. I mean, that's someone who everyone sort of expected to win going into that
Yeah.
ceremony, and I imagine the heartbreak of that was very
The
palpable,
sto-
especially for her, I
yeah,
would
I mean, the
imagine.
story goes that like as they were announcing it, and the Oscar goes too, like she was already like rising from her seat, and then it goes,
Like, all right, it's time
yeah,
for my coronation.
exactly, exactly. I mean,
Yes.
that also sounds totally embellished, like over the years, but that's the
Yeah.
story, you know.
It's one of those things where if Oscar voters could look back, they might be like, "Oh,
There's
maybe we could have,
Yeah, and I think
you
with
know."
a lot of her ones, there's one or two. Like she loses to Jennifer Jones in 43, she loses to Loretta Young in 47, she loses to Jane Wyman in 48, and she loses to Susan Hayward in 58. And it's like some of these are all like I see how this won, but
Yeah.
absolutely like even like yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, there you go. I
Mhm.
love very good answers, very creative. But let's talk about this year at the Oscars, the
Mhm.
11th Academy Awards. You've
Mhm.
got some returning faves here, but a majority of this category is actresses with their first nominations, which
Mhm.
is exciting. We have Fay Bainter for White Banners, Bette Davis for Jezebel, Wendy Hiller for Pygmalion, Norma Shearer for Marie Antoinette, and Margaret Sullavan for Three Comrades, with the winner being Bette Davis for Jezebel. So before we talk about these performances individually, I
Yes.
know you already sort of talked a little bit about your overall feelings on the category, but did you have other general observations about this lineup collectively?
I'm genuinely thrilled that Wendy Hiller is in the mix because, of course, this is like an English movie that, like, you know, like isn't a Hollywood movie at all. So for it to get this kind of traction is really great. I'm guessing it's because like Leslie Howard is a huge Hollywood star at this time, so it helps parlay because everything else attached to it, like not the director, not even though it's George Bernard Shaw, like there's these things like wouldn't exactly be major hooks for like an American audience, right?
Right.
But what's really interesting is like her Eliza Doolittle is so good, and obviously she was George Bernard Shaw's like favorite actress for the role, but like I don't know how much of her choices have just like crystallized and codified like the role, you know, like because you see things she's doing and
Yeah.
it's literally what Audrey Hepburn does, almost like beat for beat, and it's like there's times when that's in the text, but there's times when you're like this is just replicating these choices like fully.
Mm-hmm.
I really love Wendy Hiller.
You're a stan.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a really strong, interesting category. There's Fay Bainter's double nominations for the year. There's Margaret Sullavan, who I'm not terribly familiar with, but I enjoyed her a lot in obviously she has such a small filmography, and like Norma Shearer, like in the dotage of her film career, like winding down, you know, as the sort of
Mm-hmm.
dowager queen of MGM type role. Um,
Right.
yeah, but it's a good line.
It is. I think this lineup is underrated, I would
Hmm.
say. There's kind of also something for everyone, I would say, in
Yes.
this lineup. Like Fay Bainter is very subtle,
Hmm.
understated sort of thing. Wendy Hiller is certainly bringing lots of comedy. And Norma Shearer, like you said, like the Dowager is this grand sort of theatrical
Hmm.
performance. And then Margaret Sullivan, I think, is very modern in her approach, I would say, at least
Yeah.
in this film. And then the winner, Bette Davis, obviously in full Bette Davis mode, movie star.
Probably like her first great role, I would say.
Yeah, I
I
would
think
say
so.
so.
Like I know she's
Yeah.
got some interesting stuff before, of course, like
I
Mark.
mean, I enjoy her in Up Human
Yes.
Bondage, but this is really a good crystallizing of
Yeah.
all of her talents, I would say. But yeah, we do have a number of interesting new stars here. Wendy Hiller, Margaret Sullivan wasn't like new, but new to the Academy.
Mhm.
Fay Bainter, too, was, a stage star and just making her films sort of in this area. So
Mhm.
I love that we just have different kinds of roles here, too. It's
Yes.
not just the domestic drama or the women on trial or,
Yeah. Yeah.
that sort of thing. So I'm excited to dig into these individually. Are we ready?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's start with Fay Bainter for White Banners. Okay, so
This was tough.
Fay Bainter, yeah. She was mostly a supporting character type actress, at least in film.
Yeah. I think I was trying to figure this out because one of the questions that got submitted was like, I think it's that she was a stage actress and she didn't make her first movie till she was 41.
Right?
Yeah, and like she's an established, quite a well-established stage actress. And MGM came looking for her, or sorry, Hollywood came looking for her, and I think it means that like she obviously didn't go through like the machinery. So whereas careers were way more stratified back then, you were a lead actor, you were a supporting actor, and you were like kind of groomed accordingly. Like she has all the skills she needs already by the time she starts her film career. So I think it means she can kind of do both, even though like she is at an age where Hollywood typically isn't giving lead roles to actresses.
Right.
And much like White Bandit, it's like she is sort of the emotional core of the movie, but it's a strange movie. Like
yes, it really is.
like I did not expect to need to know this much about refrigeration technology in 1919 as an essential plot point. Like that was weird.
Very random. Yes. But of course, we should mention she is our first person, regardless of gender, to get a lead and supporting nomination in the same year. So before Julianne Moore or Cate Blanchett or Sigourney Weaver or Scarlett Johansson, sure, there was Fay Bainter. She was the blueprint. And so just to get into a summary of White Banners, again, yes, strange film. She's playing Hannah, who appears on the doorstep of a family who are sort of in need of domestic help, and she becomes their cook and their housekeeper. And the patriarch of the family, played by Claude Rains, he is a science teacher / inventor, and he's sort of looking for the next great idea, and it turns out to be that the ice box like doesn't need ice, and it's eventually going to turn into what is the refrigerator as we know it.
It went into a lot of detail about the mechanics of refrigeration, like and innovation.
Sure did.
You know, like I could understand what was happening, but like this is a lot to ask, like for us to really pay attention to.
In the middle of what is supposed to be like a wrenching sort of emotional drama about a mother and a son sort of thing.
I think so. Like, I tried to find out more about like where this movie came from, as in more so like where this story came from, because in the opening credits they're like from the short story in like Collier's magazine or something, or you know, it feels like a short story that got published that year that was like the event, you know, and. The credits fully present it like as if you already sort of know this story going into it, which I think accounts for some of its inexplicable nature, where you're like, this is what's happening. But like I looked up further, apparently, and on Wikipedia it says it's based on like a novel, and like the guy who wrote it was a minister who turned to novel writing like in his 50s, and like he went on to write like The Robe and Magnificent Obsession. So like. Yeah. Other things that got made into reasonably functional films. But yeah, I did want to say, so like I do think that Fay Bainter is slightly verging on category fraud in this, because she like even though she is the lead, she's the female lead in the movie, her plot is like very secondary, even though it comes to the fore at the end. I actually was convinced, like when I was watching it, and I was convinced that like, okay, so the mom of the family is going to die of her illness, and Faye's going to marry Claude. So like even when that doesn't happen, I'm like, this is because the mother in the family, you kind of thought she has to either she's too nice, so she has to die, and like, or she's not a monster, in which case she would also have to die. But it was just really strange, these weird little details. And I did love
and it doesn't even go anywhere.
No. And I did love Bonita Granville as the daughter. She was a lot of fun.
Yes.
Nancy Drew herself, like that was quite enjoyable for like a character that could be deeply annoying.
Yeah, so really in the middle of all this refrigeration talk, we have this story of the reason why she shows up on this family's doorstep is that they are neighbors with this kid, Peter, who she has some sort of a connection with that isn't really made clear until like the final 10 minutes. And I have to say, like, I hadn't seen this before doing this, and I read the synopsis of the film, and it just fully says like he's her son, like that's what it is. And then like the film presents it as like kind of like a final twist sort of thing towards the end, and I'm like, oh, I feel like, okay, did people know that going into the film that that's what it was?
It's kind of like when you rewatch Gosford Park, right, where like the first time you watch it and you don't get that Clive Owen is Helen Mirren's son. But then when you rewatch it and all the staff arriving at the house, and it's like and she's like, "Who are you?" Parks, did you say? And it's like the first instinct, like, well, she's clearly he's clearly her son, like obviously. But
Right.
I think she made it work. That whole monologue where she's explaining like what the title of the thing is about, like don't surrender and use your white flag as a white banner. It's just, it felt so like this is being adapted badly from something which I think is quite popular, and like and in a way where like you would never make this movie. Like this is just like kind of unfilmable, and arguably it is.
Right.
Yeah.
We also, I would like to mention, we have another film here in Best Actress about a woman, a mother who is sacrificing herself for the benefit of her child and wanting them to have a better life. The whole trope continues here, and I'll say what I said about Marie Dressler actually with Fay Bainter here, is that the difference here is that they're not like the glamorous movie star type. You know, they aren't Gloria Swanson. They're not Barbara Stanwyck, who are both great in those roles, obviously. Some of my favorites of this era. But there's just like a certain glamour to those performances that isn't really present with Marie Dressler in her films or Fay Bainter here. She seems like the kind of woman that you would know in real life. You know, someone who is around middle-aged and has had to make some hard choices in her life. But she doesn't really grandstand very much. She sort of fades into the background, which might be part of why she feels like category fraud, is that she's almost too good at fading into the background.
Yeah. Like, by the end, I was so confused because, like, there's the kid, Jackie Cooper, like, Uncle Fester, right? Like, he's sort of standing around and, like, he has 4 parents. Like, he's got his actual mother and his actual dad has turned up. And he's learned that that's his son and his mother. And then his adopted fake dad is there, but also his surrogate dad, Claude Rains, is there. It's just like this. And it's like they're trying to tell us that, like, oh, we need to feel sorry for this boy. And like, he has twice as many parents as I have. And like, he seems okay. Like,
so many mentors who just want to take care of him and are always putting him first.
In a way that was like
we should be so lucky.
And it's even made clear in it, right? Remember when he screws over Claude Rains inadvertently by getting his rival to showing his rival the refrigerator thing they're building, and Claude Rains freaks out him. It's like, you'll be fine. You're rich. Like, I am destroyed. It's like everything is like, the kid's gonna be fine. I think it'll be okay if he does or doesn't. I don't know. It's definitely obviously, like, you know, with older movies, sometimes a lot of times social attitudes have changed. This felt like a lot of, like, if they just said the stuff, there would be no drama, but it just feels so, like, difficult to make this really to feel a lot about what's happening in this story, I think.
It's contrived.
It's interesting that Edmund Goulding directed it, because, like, he's pretty good with these kind of, like, he's good at melodrama, and he's good at, like, kind of intermeshing, like, storylines. Like, he did Grand Hotel and he did Dark Victory, and I really wanted to like it because I do like Fay Bainter, but it just wasn't really working for me.
I think it's just trying to be a lot of different things, and it really doesn't blend those things in a way that even makes them feel like they are supposed to be together. Like, it's just like a lot of plot lines that feel like they should be there because they were in the initial text, but it doesn't really blend into a story that is like, all of these pieces make sense together.
Yeah, and I think in many cases they kind of overcast it in places. Like, Claude Rains is such a star and I love him. He's great in everything. And it's like, he's really charming. And Bonita Granville is great, but she almost steals the movie in places where it's like, she's kind of not supposed to be this good.
Right.
And like the actress playing the mother of the family is like, she was okay, but it's also like, you seem like a really good actor and this is a nothing role. And
it's really nothing.
Like less than nothing. She's kind of like, is she ill? Or did I remember that wrong? Or is she just useless?
Well, I know that the daughter gets pneumonia.
Maybe it's just, I think it's just that the mom's useless then. Like, it's like, as in like, like she seemingly does nothing. And it's so confusing because it's like, she needs to be mean because then I'll like, not like, you know, otherwise it's like she's not serving anything in this plot. Like, very strange.
Yeah. And I feel like some of that lack of focus for Fay Bainter kind of had a negative impact on my view of her performance in a way.
Yeah.
Because she just doesn't leave very much of an impact on me, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know, maybe Maybe if I had seen this outside the context of this show and doing best actress performances, and sort of trying to study them, I would maybe just be like, wow, she's a really interesting, understated
No,
actress.
I don't think so. Like, like there's things which like aren't very well remembered because they're underrated, and there's things where it's like I think there's probably a reason why this wasn't remembered a lot. Like,
Yeah.
I think its only real major merit is just like as a footnote in Fay Bainter getting 2 Oscar nominations in the same year. I think that it doesn't actually have a whole lot of notable things. The poster was nice.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that. Also, her whole mantra through the film, which is the idea of like turning the other cheek.
Yes.
Or just like refusing to engage, basically, or just sort of letting things happen to you.
Yeah.
And you just have to sort of go on from there. I feel like she just has a passive quality about her that
and that's very...
she does fulfill that idea. It's just like not interesting to watch as a viewer.
But
it's almost frustrating.
I think though it does. I think that does fit in with like all these dutiful, distant mother type things that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
As in like it's like I'll give up everything for my son, and I can only witness him from a distance, and it's all just like this weird, just it doesn't like resonate well with audiences today at all. And the movies that do well, like Stella Dallas, is because like there's a bit more going on here. Like just a little bit more. There's a bit more flair in the performance, maybe, even though it's still perpetuating a lot of these like kind of problems in these plot lines, but it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. And then to see her talking about like women being weak creatures and that's why they need men.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much of that sort of thing she believes that herself, or that she's also maybe trying to subtly manipulate some of her situations. See, I mean, naturally, I would hope that it's that.
Well,
but
that's what I
fear
thought
that
was
it's
happening
not
at first.
Really that. Right.
Like I kind of thought like, okay, she's got this shrewd, canny understanding of people, and like she knows how to like say the thing, but then and that's fine whenever it's like someone who turns up, this magical figure, and like fixes everyone's lives and then disappears. That
Mary Poppins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's fine. But then it's only because she gets confronted with like her own mistakes, and like she's just so... all the wisdom that we have seen demonstrated from her just seems to be gone, and she makes nothing but poor choices and doesn't even want to make choices, and it's just so strange. And all these things could be fine. Like you can make that movie, right? Someone who's really great at espousing advice, but their own life is a disaster. Like you can do that, but it just didn't really lean into it where it needed to.
Yeah. I think I just wanted the film to be something that it wasn't, ultimately. I just saw a lot of potential in that story, but it just goes down such a predictable path, and just the way she performs it is very, very matter-of-fact and plain and really not standing out very much, which is, again, maybe part of the role, but it's hard to really get excited about this performance.
Yeah, I think she is definitely the 5th place nominee, as in when they were... And also this is, really early on in the time when they've got supporting things, so suddenly they've had to go from filling 3 to 5 nominations to filling 10 nominations, and like every year with the Golden Globes we see the difference where it's like, oh, you gotta fill 10 leads, and you're like, there are roles which don't get nominated every year, that sucks, but sometimes you're like, yeah, it might be harsh, but I'm okay with there just being 5, because sometimes you're like, oh, they have to pad this, and it diminishes the quality, I think, of the other things next to it when they're seen with stuff that's subpar.
Yeah. So that's Fay Bainter. There's one review from the New York Times that I wanted to read of the time, which said, Miss Bainter's expression of Mr. Douglas's preachment strips it of whatever sententiousness it might have had. That's a $10 word, sententiousness.
Which paper is this?
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of good reviews overall, but again, I couldn't really find a lot of just like raves so much. I don't know if you found anything in your research.
It just seems like the general like tone's like, it's all right.
Yeah.
Like it's not not a disaster. It's just very like, fine, it was okay.
Yeah. As our friend Cody Derricks would say on the 1930 episode, it's kind of a who cares movie.
Yeah.
Generally speaking.
Yeah.
You get to the end and you say, who cares?
Even though there's like quite a lot of talent involved. I think that's the thing that was maybe a bit galling, where it's like, oh, there's so many good people like in the performance and directing. Yeah. It's just, I think the fault is all from the original material. And like I said, knowing that the writer, the novelist, is like a pastor. Like, it's just so like this feels really Christian.
Yes.
And not even
so.
explicitly, just like it's like this. It's something which I don't necessarily go for in this, and I can't. It's not bad. It's just like, no, this is for a whole different type of person. And like it's again, it's the whereas before, it's that dutifulness. It's that particular kind of like self-sacrificing dutifulness, especially as a role for women. Like it's just ugh. Yeah.
Of course, it's always the women who are having to do the self-sacrificing and whatnot in this time. Anything else on Fay Bainter? I feel like we've gone through most of it.
Not in this movie. Of course, she's much better in Jezebel, but
yeah,
obviously,
we'll get
and
to
that was proven right.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, let's move on to our next nominee, which I think we'll have a lot to say about. Cool. Wendy Hiller.
Yes.
For Pygmalion.
Yes.
So you've already talked a little bit about her. She was a British actress who had a big stage career. She was discovered by George Bernard Shaw, and she became part of his plays, one of them being Pygmalion, actually. So she's adapting this role to the film, playing Eliza Doolittle. Many people know this story. I'm sure people know it, but for those of you who don't, of course, it is the story of a poor woman, a flower girl named Eliza Doolittle. She's discovered on the street by Henry Higgins, who is a linguist, and he wants to sort of use her as an experiment to see if he can transform her into an elegant lady who speaks proper English. So the film is sort of all about those lessons she takes and seeing whether she can pass as a princess, essentially. And she also has kind of a contentious relationship with Higgins, with the potential to lead to a more loving relationship. Obviously, there are different interpretations there, but this is a story that would be adapted to My Fair Lady, which won Best Picture in 1964. So there's a real Oscar history with this story. So thoughts on Wendy Hiller's version of Eliza Doolittle?
Okay, so I'm Irish, as in from the old country. So George Bernard Shaw is like one of those figures who is like a titan, and we're taught to like revere him. Although weirdly, his career actually isn't in Ireland; it's all in England. And his plays have nothing about Irish identity in them, so I do think it's a bit of reaching. But anyway, it means sort of like when Shaw comes up, it's like I have to be like the master.
Bow down.
Basically,
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, it's. I was looking up some interesting things. So obviously, there's the record that George Bernard Shaw for a long time was the only Oscar winner and Nobel laureate. He won the Best Adapted Screenplay Oscar for this, and Nobel Prize that's since been matched by Bob Dylan. But for a long time, he was the only person to have this distinction. But what's really interesting is, as I was doing some research, now I've never read the play and I've never seen the play like performed, but a lot of stuff and a lot of the most iconic bits of it, or not most iconic, many iconic bits from it were added in this film adaptation, which later appeared in My Fair Lady, which I think has also done a lot to crystallize this idea of what the story is. But so for instance, the bit when she's doing the marble thing and she swallows it, basically Wendy Hiller did swallow one, and then they sort of worked it into a whole scene. And it's like, that's a really great, it's a bit everyone remembers with a lot of charm, right? Because it helps puncture that quite brutal like teaching montage. And more importantly, at the end, originally she was meant to go off and marry Freddie, and that was supposed to be quite clear. But they sort of just reworked it. I personally like, and obviously like their relationship, Henry and Liza's kind of like fucked.
Yeah.
I think it does make more sense for them to be together, at least for a sort of like, in the way that Leslie Howard portrayed Higgins, it made sense. In the way Rex Harrison does in My Fair Lady, where he's an absolute bastard. It's like, and Audrey Hepburn is like the most beautiful woman who's ever lived. Like she's just so gracious and all that. It makes no sense that they're together. But like, I like how Howard portrays Higgins. Like, it's just a little bit dweeby. Like he's really, because you can see that like he really cares about this, but he's also dysfunctional and deficient in his own way. Like you can tell that he's the weird guy at parties that no one really wants to talk to. Whereas you don't get that with the Rex Harrison version. He seems just like a fabulous debonair like man about town. Wendy Hiller is like just truly just mesmerizing. Like she's someone who is a lot like Peggy Ashcroft or Elaine Stritch, where they didn't do a lot of movies and they were obviously very much theater actors. Even though they do have quite a fair amount of movies, but you can see in the films they pick where it's like, oh, you weren't interested in like having a film career, but like you did pick just a lot of interesting projects, not all necessarily good, but I can see what drew you to them. So like one of my all-time favorite movies is I Know Where I'm Going, and a later film of hers from the 40s. And like she has such like vitality in her screen presence, and this is just such a great showcase of it. And like you totally see like what George Bernard saw in her.
Yeah, I would say that she is definitely the definitive Eliza Doolittle for me.
Yeah.
And I would sort of agree too that Leslie Howard is, that they work so well together that you do, of all of the iterations I've seen of this story, they sort of do make sense that they would be together, and maybe not even like get together romantically, but just be in each other's lives, I guess, you know?
Yeah, like I'm weirdly rooting for him, and I think it's because he doesn't seem as toxic as the other versions do.
Right. Yeah. And I think audiences responded to that too, because Leslie Howard was playing a lot of like the guy who gets cheated on for a lot of his career in this decade. So I feel like he makes sense in that.
Yeah, and he's pretty beloved at this period as well. So like
yeah,
and also because he's like a co-director on this movie, isn't he? So like and I think Anthony Asquith is the other co-director, and he had directed movies at this point, but I don't think it's like one of those things. I think it's like maybe where he did a lot of the technical stuff and Howard did a lot of the performance-based stuff.
I could see that.
Yeah, or I feel there's something like that going on there, but because also like there's such like legacy where it's like we're doing a George Bernard Shaw movie. Bernard Shaw was like notoriously skeptical of people like doing film adaptations of his work. Gabriel Pascal, the producer, like was the only person he felt that like he trusted, and he did 4 adaptations of Shaw things. This is the best one, but like you're right, like Wendy is the blueprint, and the thing I was saying before, it's just like you can see literal like just like intonations of line readings that she does being repeated by Audrey Hepburn like 26 years later, you know, like it. And there's things of course where that could be in the writing. I probably think not, where it's like it's just so unbelievable like how much she like just like lays down this role and like this is how you do it.
Yeah, pretty much. And all due respect to Audrey Hepburn, who I love, I do not think she could convincingly play the sort of crass early side of this character very well, because like again, you can like put her in any sort of dirt or any sort of mangled look that you want, she's still Audrey Hepburn, and she still has a little bit of that pribness in her that you know, the character with the Cockney accent, I don't think she really plays that exactly great, but
no, like arguably not at all.
Well, yeah,
no, as in her movie stardom carries her through that movie, I think. Some of it's like, oh, this is rough.
All due respect, but Wendy Hiller, she doesn't really have like the conventional beauty of an Audrey Hepburn or a Julie Andrews who did it on stage, which I think also makes her transformation in Pygmalion all the more impactful when you watch it.
Yeah, I have this principle I find where it's like when someone is attainably hot. So it's like someone in a movie where it's like you're really handsome or beautiful, but you look like the most handsome or beautiful person like I know in my life. Whereas people that are like movie stars, it's like that is a whole other level.
They're like blindingly.
Yeah, exactly. and it's like those are the kind of people, like that's like how people really respond to like TV characters, right? Where it's like it's the same kind. It's like you're really hot, and like you're like again the hottest person I know, but you're not like so, because if you were that hot, you'd be a movie star. Like yeah. And she has that kind of quality where it's like you look like people who I've actually seen.
Right.
It adds so much, because like I said, when Audrey Hepburn's doing it, it's that thing where it's like Grace Kelly in The Country Girl. It's like the movie's telling me you look bad, but like you're still stunningly gorgeous underneath it.
Right. Yes, the eyes don't lie. Yeah. I think she even has a great musicality to the way she speaks in that Cockney accent in the first third or so of the film before she loses it, where, you know, even though it's like this kind of harsh sounding accent, it has a rhythm to it that's almost Shakespearean, as strange as that is to say, just because it flows so naturally out of her and it feels like it comes so easy, like she's just been speaking it all her life. And then after the transformation, where she sort of really changes and fixes her elocution and really slows down her way of speaking, even though it's technically correct, based on what Higgins is teaching her and believes to be correct, it feels less natural just because she's like over enunciating everything, and she has her rehearsed lines about the rain in Spain stays mainly on the plate. And Wendy Hiller as a person in her regular speech would trend more towards the latter way of speaking, obviously, but she really does convince you, I think, that it's the Cockney accent that comes more naturally. So I mean, it's almost like a dual performance that she's giving.
I mean, not to be mean to Audrey Hepburn, because it sounds like I'm complaining about her a lot. I'm not, but there are major glaring faults with her in My Fair Lady. I feel like Wendy Hiller's actually met a Cockney person,
right?
Whereas Audrey Hepburn was a Belgian British woman who only ever went to like private schools in England. It's these are the realities, like whereas like Wendy Hiller was born in provincial Manchester, like the odds are more in her favor.
right
But yeah, I wanted to ask you a question because I watched this with my boyfriend and he was having a hard time with one detail of it. When did you think the movie was set?
I don't even know if I even thought about that. I assumed it was sort of contemporary.
Because My Fair Lady is Edwardian, right? And the play is Edwardian, even though it's not Edwardian. It's 1914, and King Edward died in 1910. But the point is, like, it's set then-ish, but in Pygmalion, it feels like it's set contemporary. Like, there's some of the cars and stuff, and I think my boyfriend was so used to My Fair Lady, so he was expecting it to look like that. So the fact that it wasn't, I was like, what's happening? I don't like this. Which I can see that happening. Like even some of the outfits, like they look genuinely quite good. And like you're wearing a 1938 dress, like, and I think that's one thing My Fair Lady kind of maybe does get a bit, as in focusing on we're going to make the costume, the jarring difference between like Cockney flower girl dress and Hungarian princess is more apparent in 1914 than it necessarily is in 1930, even though it's pretty apparent still.
Right. Yeah. I wanted to highlight one scene actually, which is the scene where she has to take a bath.
Yes.
Which is just truly unhinged, and how she just absolutely refuses to take a bath, and like the housekeeper, whoever that is so confused and by how much she's refusing to get in the tub. And then just the cut to her just like screaming bloody murder while she's being scrubbed up and down. I mean, obviously this is the most broadly comedic scene, I would say, in the film. And I love that she just goes for it as a performer in all aspects, but especially here. The line where she's just like screaming, "I'm getting wet. This has never happened to me before." And she's like never been treated like this. And she's like calling out for help. It's so over the top, and we don't really get that kind of scene again of that nature. But even in a broader scene like that, I just think there's something very vanity free in how she performs this throughout the film that you really don't always see from the leading stars of the day. So
I would say that the main thing this film has in its favor and success, especially compared to the other nominees, is that this is notably the only non-Hollywood movie in the lineup. So it means that like the other two are Warner Brothers, two of the other four are Warner Brothers, and the other two are MGM. And you have to remember, it's like, well, Britain isn't bound by the production code at this period. So like there's moments of like, there's slight moments of like interesting frankness on certain things that gets through in a way that is sometimes quite arresting. And I think this is one of those examples where it's like, like I'm pretty sure they just wouldn't do it. I mean, this film had the word bloody in it, which like at the time was like the first instance of a swear in like a British film. Like it was also like moderately shocking and titillating, you know. Obviously it's not. Obviously it's so tame by today's standards, but like it was still moderately shocking.
Well, yeah, that's part of her first big outing as like the new her, which is, I would say, probably her best scene in the film, for me at least, where she's really just like over enunciating all of her words and truly just going to the opposite end of how she spoke before, very refined in a way that feels very put on. But I love seeing like her personality gradually slip out over the course of that conversation with the party guests.
And what's so great about that scene is like you see, when you see her first, it's just like this deadness in her face, and you can see her becoming more and more alive as she slips more and more. Like you can see her going, oh god, it's in the way that like, because the similar scenes in the Audrey Hepburn, but like Audrey never really has that slip. It's a funny scene as well in a different way. It's just so interesting seeing Wendy be a lot more present and like in that scene, which I thought was great.
I love when she tells the group about her aunt.
Yes.
She just has such good comedic timing where the one woman is talking about like how influenza and how it runs through her family every year, and she's just like, without missing a beat, she's just like, my aunt died of influenza. But she says it with like this proper sort of posh accent.
Yeah. Which is in many ways actually quite like it's not a major like moment in the movie. I think it actually is. It sort of does speak to a thing where it's like ideas are like what's proper to say. It's nonsense. It's like you can say whatever you want when you're posh. It's purely just like people think that you can't say this, like, but you could, like they could, and they probably would. It's like even if it was being shocking, it would still be like, yeah, but you still say it. And that's what's so interesting. Where like she's like, it doesn't really matter because she's saying with a posh accent. Everyone's like, oh, how delightful.
Yeah, they're just fascinated by this strange woman who keeps going on and on about her aunt and her entire family tree.
Yeah, it's like when you're posh, you're an eccentric. When you're like common, you're crazy. You know, like that's
exactly.
You know, it's like it's a little bit of that going on. And once you're in the club, if you're in the club, it's fine.
Very true. Very good point. How do we feel about her scenes towards the end of the film where she's fully transformed into her new life and her new way of speaking and sort of standing up for herself and wanting to have Higgins give her the respect that she deserves?
They're the hardest part to reconcile today, right? Like they have bits, and this is in My Play too, where it's like the bits where they address the fact that like I can't go back to being a flower girl. It's like I think that is actually there's something there. But also the fact that like, but I can't actually have a job, and I think there's some moments there that are nice, and it's just like this weird thing about being like the idle middle class or whatever, where it's like I don't even know what I was trying to say, but it's just that tug you feel at that bit, you kind of go, oh, this is actually kind of real, that there's that she has transformed and she can't go back to what she was. I think that is good, but I think the conclusion it leads to isn't great. Or at least, but at the same time, it's like, where else could it go? Because like I said, I think that if she goes off and marries Freddie, it feels unsatisfying. So, I mean, I think this is very like the Shavian type of play, isn't it? I think where it's like, it's about two different ideologies discussing and debating with each other or something like that. And it's the first half is, or the first two acts are always much more enjoyable. It definitely gets a bit boring to it. I'm glad that it's comparatively short.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say I think she handles these more dramatic scenes really well in terms of her performance, and it's such a significant shift of who she is in the beginning of the film, and really standing up for herself and also being very vulnerable. You know, she has this great moment that I took note of where she sort of softens her voice and she says she just wants a little kindness. And her voice is sort of breaking when she's saying, like, I'm not dirt under your feet.
Yeah.
And I was just really struck by those little moments there. And even, like, when she goes out and she's encountering the flower girl, you know, out in the street towards the end.
That bit was especially good, I felt.
Looks her up and down and doesn't even say much, but says so much at the same time. It's a testament to her versatility, I think, that she gets to show like so many different layers and do the comedy and the drama equally as compelling. So
I always remember this portion dragging on a bit in My Fair Lady. That's why it's just like I was like, oh, thank God this part. I think because they cram in a musical number there. But and I love all the songs in that show, but it's just like you're just kind of like, oh, this is not that interesting. It's fine. Like I think the thing I said before, where it's like I'd liked this Henry Higgins more, so I think it meant I was actually more invested in how he was going to react and feel about things. Whereas in the other ones, I'm kind of like, he's a bastard. Like, get out. With this one, it was sort of like I do want to see how he's going to react to her being back in his life in some way, or like at the start, he's the emotionally mature one, and she's like the basically a child, right? But by the end, she's got this emotional maturity, and he's just so petulant. Like shrieking about his slippers and stuff, like all this kind of stuff. And it's so like, you're not charming, you're not like what, you're not a catch buddy, but and whether or not she's got like Stockholm syndrome or something, I don't know. But I guess the point is that you're kind of like, what is drawing these two people together? Like they just seem so incompatible. But it's better than like a lot of examples like that, because I think they're both such drawn characters.
Agreed. Yeah. And it speaks to them both being nominated. Wait,
Yeah,
was he
exactly.
nominated?
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was.
he was. Okay, yeah.
It got nominations for picture, actor, actress, and screenplay, and one for
Right.
screenplay, and it's pretty fair. I think
Which
that's
makes
why
sense. Yeah,
it deserves. I think.
those are the four. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are a lot of films I've talked about on this show so far with Best Actress where I'm really impressed with one part of the performance,
Hmm.
like one part of the film, even. Like the beginning, she's really interesting and dynamic, but then like she loses steam by the end, and I just sort of don't care.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't really know what she's nominated for. When I'm like getting to the 2/3 point, I'm like, where's the nomination coming from? And then the third act comes, and I'm like, oh, now I get it. With this, I think this is one of those performances where from beginning to end she totally owns the film, even though this is like, a co-lead situation with her and Leslie Howard. I think she is absolutely the person you leave this film remembering. And I think she just earns this journey for her character from beginning to end in a way that very few that I've seen so far in this show, at least,
Yeah.
really earn that. And some of that is the writing, I think, is particularly strong. But
I think it absolutely is. Like, I'm not to sound like dismissive of screenwriting or screenwriters, but like George Bernshaw is on a whole different level, like,
yeah.
so like, yeah, it's fitting that like, yeah, the writing is just really good, like at every level, like structurally characterized material for them to work with, all that, everything, like, is just, yeah, good.
Yeah, it's airtight. Yeah. This review from the New York Times is very short and simple, but it says, Miss Hiller is a discovery. And they actually capitalize the word discovery, and they go on to say that she deserves the capital, which is a very good statement. They say, we cannot believe that even Mr. Shaw could find a flaw in her performance. So very glowing, very Star is Born kind of moment for Wendy Hiller here. So no surprise that she would be nominated.
No, absolutely not. Like, it's. I often point to things like Mildred Pierce and Erin Brockovich as like, this is what a Best Actress winning performance should be. It's like the actress should be in every scene and she should have so much to do, and ideally be the titular role.
Yes.
But what I mean is that like she similarly gets so much to do, like in different ways in different scenes, and it's that same thing where she dominates the movie, even though, like you said, it's a two-hander. I think it's that is so much more her movie.
Yeah, looking at our friend Matthew Stewart's website, Screen Time Central, it says she only has like 52% of the film, like her scenes, but it feels like 90%.
Well, because even when she's not on screen, all the characters are
Right.
talking about her. Like when she's not there, Higgins is always talking about her. So like that, I mean, I that, like she just constantly is the priority.
She looms large. Yes, exactly. Yes. All right. Well, let's move on to our next losing nominee, Norma Shearer for Marie Antoinette. So here we've come to the final Norma Shearer nomination, and it's really the grandest of them all, I would say. This is actually just the very next film she did after Romeo and Juliet, her previous nomination, and this is another huge dramatic period piece, enormous budget, 2.5 hours. This was the last film that Irving Thalberg had been planning before his death in 1936, so this had a special resonance with her being his wife, of course. So the film, it tells the story of Marie Antoinette, and it's sort of charting her journey from being a teenager in Vienna to becoming the Queen of France, and lots of stuff that happens along the way. She's marrying the king, King Louis XVI. She meets Count Axel von Fersen, played by Tyrone Power, who she just develops an instant connection with, obviously because he looks like Tyrone Power. And eventually she and the king have kids, and the French people start to revolt because of various socioeconomic reasons. It's the French Revolution. And then she gets framed in the famous affair of the necklace, which causes even more mistrust. And they're both faced with execution. There's a whole lot of plot here. There's an intermission. There's an overture. This is the big epic of this Best Actress lineup. So before we get into this film, actually, in this performance, what are your thoughts on Norma Shearer as an actress in general?
I do like her. I think I understand why she isn't like in the pantheon of stars alongside like her contemporaries like Greg Garbo, Myrna Loy, Claudette Colbert, and, Joan Crawford, all these people.
Yeah.
I think that she has a very nice screen presence. And I know that's she always seems like quite nice, like she's like, oh, you seem like a nice person. And I know she could play like somewhat edgy, sexier, more frank stuff like the divorcee, but I feel that her screen presence defaulted more towards like nice. And that maybe helps being like queen of the studio, like not having to compete with as viciously as other people at the studio had to, maybe. But like for me, my favorite movie of hers is The Women. I think that is like the most Norma Shearer like role. And there's a recorded version of the 2001 Broadway revival with Cynthia Nixon in the Norma Shearer role. And apparently, I think it's closer to the original text than the original Broadway production. But what's really interesting is the differences between their performances, where the Women is clearly more attuned for Norma Shearer's screen presence, because the way Cynthia Nixon plays her, she's kind of an idiot. Like there's like oblivious, and there's someone where it's like, you seem a bit stupid.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of and it's being played for comedy more so. But in general, like Norma, I think that her movies may not always be the most engaging to a modern audience, just because they all seem quite nice.
Yeah, it's hard to get excited about nice.
Yeah, exactly. Like in The Women, famously, Joan Crawford steals the whole picture, and she does. Yeah. No, as much as Norma is really nice and fun in it, it's like Rosalind Russell and Joan Crawford and like even Polly Goddard make so much more bigger splashes than her.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do a count of how many times we refer to Norma as nice.
Yeah, exactly. This is such like a fitting role for her, because it is like I said, Dowager Queen of MGM. Like it's this is what you do. Like this insanely luxurious production, not too challenging dramatic scenes, but she looks great throughout.
I'd say towards the end she gets to do that a little more than for most of it, but yeah. So I've been pretty hot and cold on Norma Shearer through this journey. I have performances that I like from her, some that I just don't really think she's really worthy of a nomination. But I'm a little sad to be at the end of the road for Norma here. Like, she's been such a constant in this first season of the show, and I've been talking about her like every other year because she was nominated every other year. So it's a little bittersweet, but she would do 5 other films after this, including The Women, and then she retired in 1942. So this really is the end. But I'm just going to come out and say right here, I think that this is easily her best performance that she's been nominated for. Easily, without question, my number one.
Yeah.
And I also feel like it's so rare that you have someone really going out on top with their final nomination. Like, usually their best work is like in their prime and they win for the role in their prime, and it's like the later stages, it's like, oh, some nice goodwill, but like not really matching the prime. Here I think she sort of does go out in the most grand fashion.
Yeah.
And so I like that aspect of her getting this last nomination for such a huge epic kind of role that I think really does suit her very well. I mean, I've also talked a lot about how she tends to be a theatrical kind of performer and really trying to sort of play for the audience's emotions in a very direct way, not really suitable to modern styles of acting, I guess, which is part of why she maybe isn't as loved. But I think in this situation, I think it works just because the stakes are so high, because she is the Queen of France and she's dealing with like all of these huge momentous things that all of her reactions that are so over dramatic that feel a little misplaced in those earlier performances.
None of the people in this movie are like real people, so the fact that they don't act like real people is kind of fine. Like I
think she matches the energy of the film.
Well. And also, like I said, I think by the end of the movie as well, she is an entirely different character, and that in a way that is fitting. Like, she's just so broken. So I think there is also like it's playing into her not as great characteristics as a performer, for the most part. And then when she has to do like some actual heavy lifting near the end, it still works.
She just manages to evoke a lot of sympathy, at least from me, in this situation, because even though she's in this very powerful position, she is just faced with a lot of opposition from very early on, which she doesn't even really understand herself very much. And I think she plays that kind of like, what did I do that is like upsetting so many people? She plays that very effectively, kind of like the blissful ignorance sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that she came to power from an early age, you know, as a teenager, being so excited because she's going to be like the queen. I think she sort of plays into that immaturity and sort of thing being in over her head.
I absolutely believe that she's the age she's supposed to be in that as well. Like, I think her performance is very good. And, like, you know, she's like 38 here, I think, when this was made. And, like, she's supposed to play like 14 to 36.
Yeah.
And, like, I do see a progression of like maturity throughout it in a way that like does deserve to be praised. And I was sincerely rooting for her and Louis. Like, I thought Robert Morley does a great job as like just dweeby enough, but like likable enough. And I'm rooting for him. I was gonna say it helps that she is in this movie. Not only is the production like, but she's surrounded by such great talent as well. Like in her co-stars, like there's Tyrone Power, Robert Morley, John Barrymore, Joseph Schildkraut,
Gladys George.
It's just
past Best Actress nominee.
Just names. You know, like it's and it's in like pretty fun roles, like Schildkraut especially. Just, you know, he's so villainous and like he looks like a drag queen.
I love his makeup.
Yeah, like everyone, like, and because think of this way, like everyone has to look bizarre in it because it's like pre-revolutionary France, so he has to look even more bizarre, and he manages to succeed in that. So it's like good for like the styling department on this, because like I believe it totally. I suppose my unpopular opinion with the movie is that I think that the story of Marie Antoinette is quite boring, because there needs to be two stories. And I think I love the Sofia Coppola movie because I think it does this right, where either you have the movie about decadent pre-revolutionary excess, in which case, cool, it's visual splendor and these people are all kind of disgusting, but that's what this movie is. Or it has to be like a harrowing look at, like, you know, the French Revolution. And I think most times when they do this story, they try to do both. And I think it's too jarring. So like, you're kind of like, you've gotten so used to like this courtly excess, and then you get to like, when it gets to like the prison stuff, I'm like going, I appreciate the drama, but I'm kind of bored at all this, because I've been watching this for about 2 hours, and it's a lot of people being depressed in cells, and we know she's going to die. Like, she's famous for how she died, so it's sort of like, you're just like,
a famous death for sure.
Yeah. So you're just like, you know, can't we move this along? But like I was getting a bit bored by that point, and especially when it's like heaping tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy, and it's like, oh, my son, oh, my husband, like it's, and maybe it's also because like, as much as I like portrayals of Marie Antoinette, when it comes to her as a person, I'm like, no, French aristocracy can all die. Like, I don't especially care that much about these people, you know, because for the most part, it's like, you kind of got what you deserve, structurally speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. I do think that she does excel in both versions of that story. Like, I guess I didn't mind it as much because I really did see it as just like her having the big rise to power, and then after the intermission, it's just the fall, and that's just what the story structure is. I didn't really think too much about whether it should be one or the other, but I like when she is having so much fun and sort of flitting about at the masquerade balls and just wearing these gigantic headpieces and the hair. I love that there were even times when the hair and all the accessories were like so tall that they didn't even fit in the frame.
Yeah.
Which happened a few times.
And some of the matte paintings are just gorgeous. Like, like I know it was meant to be in color originally, but they decided on black and white in the end. I think it adds so much more to it being in black and white, just because the way that it lights, it means that like her skin tone is the same as like her, you know, white silk dress, and she just glows. And they've given her, and they've like given her like some like almost Marlene Dietrich lighting, just that, like, she just pops, just so she's got just a little bit more than everyone else.
She does.
So she just has like this radiance to her, which is what the role requires. Like, she's supposed to be the Queen of France. She's the most beautiful woman who ever lived. She's Marilyn Monroe. She's Jackie Kennedy. Like, it's supposed to be this kind of, you know, absolute radiance, which I fully, absolutely believed in. And then obviously by the end, the contrast is quite stark, but like I said, I was having a bit more trouble being entirely invested.
Yeah,
some of that.
I understand that. Yeah. And then this is the kind of energy from her, though, that I was missing from The Barretts of Wimpole Street and Romeo and Juliet, especially, where she does sort of get to be the life of the party and the sort of social butterfly and the nice person that, like, I feel like I talked about it on the 1930 episode, where it's like she seems like the very nice woman who's hosting the party, who will just like talk to anyone and just having fun and just like very smiley and very genial. And I think she works so well in that mode.
Yeah, and you're right with like The Barretts of Wimpole Street and these are just like, who are these movies for? You know?
Yeah.
Like not to sound like hateful and facetious. It's just like, I don't really care. And it's not like, it's not like she's Greta Garbo who could do these stories, for instance, and be like, "Ooh, I'm just drawn to it." It's, right. I think maybe with Norma, the challenge to a contemporary audience is similar to the one when you try to make people care about Gene Simmons. So like,
ooh, yeah.
Like my boyfriend was watching Spartacus, and he was messaging me about it, going, "Oh, this lady is really cool in it," and like, it's like, she's not quite Liz Taylor, she's not quite Audrey Hepburn. It's like, that's kind of it, you know, where it's like, she's not.
Yeah.
It's not like Liz is sexier, Audrey is like pure and more. But it's sort of like, you're just not quite either. And I love Gene Simmons, but it's just that feeling of, oh, when you were going, there was two other women who were doing similar things to you but in different extreme directions, and they just swamped everything. And like, there's always people like in the pecking order, right? Like Sigourney Weaver always gets the roles that Glenn Close and Meryl Streep turned down. Like, it's what happens. And I think that from a contemporary audience, for Norma, it's like, Joan Crawford's movies are sexier, Myrna Loy's movies are more sophisticated, Garbo's movies are more like artistic. Like, there's a lot of other people who are doing everything she does just a little bit better. And she doesn't have that one niche.
Right. Very true. I do, though, want to talk about her scenes with Gladys George, which, again, we talked about her a few weeks ago. She's kind of her rival, Du Barry.
Yes.
And I love the scene where they're facing off, the two of them, and in this very classic sort of passive-aggressive, bitchy tone that she takes on, that, like, how, like, she's never walked the streets of Paris or like been in the gutter like her, but I'm sure you could tell me more about that. I mean, I live for that kind of like uber snobby Norma Shearer kind of thing, or like when she's being introduced to Tyrone Power and talking about how, oh, this is the Queen of France, and she just kind of has like this smugness in her face, like, oh yes, that's right, that's me.
Much like that photo of her holding her Oscar, right, where she has this smug smile on her face. It's just,
yes,
it's like, oh, if only someone wrote you a part, if someone wrote you a Joan Crawford movie where you were just like a real horrible piece of work, but you're like real sexy, like, just, oh, why wasn't it? Where was that picture?
I mean, I talked about this a little bit in the Romeo and Juliet episode with her. Like, I sort of want to see her do like a Lady Macbeth sort of a thing, you know? But she never really went to that extreme, I don't think, ever in her career. So
I think the Divorcee is like the most extreme she gets. And from a modern audience, it's moderately tame.
Pretty tame, for sure. And then so much of the second half of the film is the downfall. And I'll say this, I don't think it's a perfect performance. I do think some of her reactions to certain events are very like almost silent acting, and what she's sort of like almost fainting in some scenes. Just like, it's very a little bit overdone, like when she's like watching out the window and seeing
when she's confronted by when all the peasants break in and she's confronted with them like in the chamber. It's like, this is a little too much, and she's all solemn and dignified in the face of such barbarity, and you're like, okay, these people are just trying to live. Like, it's the movies really, you know, the movies those bits I felt were like a little bit distasteful, where it's like the movies really try and make you care about her, like as if she's somehow a victim. And it's like, look, they did treat her horribly. These bits are like a little bit too much, making me sad that like, you know, the people who want democracy are the villains, you know.
That is very much how this film is cast.
Yeah.
And I think we only get like one very brief montage scene like in the second half of like explaining why they're so upset.
Yeah.
but it doesn't really dig too much into it.
And I think maybe this is probably the thing I was saying that I don't like about Marie Antoinette stories. The story of her as a person is moderately interesting, or fairly interesting. The problem is French history and politics is so involved, and like it's really complicated. So like it's so hard, and it's also really boring. So like trying to get an audience to both understand this and care about it, it's just like it's a lot to ask for. And I know every country's history is like involved and boring and complicated, but like I always remember at school, like friends who had to do like American history, Irish history, and French history said French history was the absolute worst, just because it's so removed from a lot of things you can care about, because it's a lot of just very detached aristocrats squabbling.
That's fair. I mean, I didn't really. Again, I don't think the film is really even super interested in telling that kind of a story to begin with. It's really just about her reactions to all the things that are happening around her.
I did enjoy Joseph Schildkraut as like with his full like villainous turn at the end, where he's like fully like the cackling super. I thought that was great, because it's like, oh cool, this is giving a little bit of focus to this quite impenetrable piece of history or period of history for people that don't necessarily know a lot about it. Which like it's probably super reductive, but like at least you're like, cool, at least I've got a single villain to like
that you can pinpoint.
Yeah.
But I think the last half hour for Norma is, for me, probably her pinnacle as an actress, at least from these 6 nominations that I've watched. I think, when we get to the point where her and Louis are needing to escape the palace and they're caught leaving, and
that was desperate and pathetic.
Yes, and he's about to be put to death, and him coming to her and saying like, this is going to be basically the last supper that we ever have together as a family. And she's just inconsolable, and then like her kids have no idea, and they're not really telling them, and they're like wondering why she's crying. I think that scene is as effective as it is because of her. Which is not something that I have pretty much ever said about Norma's performances, all due respect, but it's just she's so distraught, and I think she communicates that really well. And if I can go there, I think that some of that might just be the death of her husband in real life maybe played a little bit of a part in just the depth of feeling that she evokes in the last half hour or so of just truly feeling like a broken person. And I think she really was able to maybe channel some real life emotions in that moment.
I think that's a valid like point to speculate on, because like it's because did she like, if I remember, did she like not want to do this movie, and she only did it because Thalberg really died?
Yeah, I think that was the case, but she would later say that it was her favorite
role, sure,
ironically,
as everyone would, right? But it's like it definitely, she had at that point in her life, she had other intentions for her, because her career was already winding down at that point. Like you said, her last movie was Romeo and Juliet 2 years before. Like she'd gone from making like 3 movies a year to 1 movie a year. Because I think
1 movie every other year.
Exactly, because I think like she was focusing on raising her kids while obviously Thalberg was working, but like that was with the assumption that he would keep living.
Yeah, but I just feel like she really modulates those final few scenes really well, and of course the moment where her kids are being taken away from her and she just wants to sort of keep extending it. Like maybe some audience members like yourself are just like, we know what happens, we don't need to keep extending this inevitability, but I feel like she really taps into something very real here that I hadn't seen for her other nominations. And then obviously the final scene of her walking to her death and having it flash back to the very beginning of her saying to like, hey, think of it, mama, I shall be Queen of France. First of all, I think that is very effective filmmaking on top of everything, but I think she's so good in these final moments. I was really surprised by how moved I was by her performance, because I mean, I've watched a lot of melodramas with this show, to be frank, and I enjoy some of them with a little bit of irony, but I would say not many of them really impact me personally or like leave me as affected as the film wants me to be. This one actually did, and I was really surprised by that. I think it does earn its ending.
Mhm.
So that's sort of where I'm at with this performance. I'm happy to leave on a high for Norma
Yeah.
because, again, it's been an up and down road for old Norma here.
Yeah.
But did you have any other thoughts on her before we move on?
No, not particularly. Like I thought overall, just yes, very sweet. So it was a great piece of work from her. I fully see how it didn't win, but yeah, other than that, it's good.
Yeah. Well, Variety said Miss Shearer shows progress as an
Oh
actress
my god.
and reveals certain capabilities heretofore kept from view. Which I would say tracks, even though that's very mean.
It's very, very mean. It's like, oh God,
it's
she's
like a
widow.
backhanded compliment. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Like, and during production, it's like she during production she would have been recently widowed.
Yeah. So, brutal stuff.
Yeah, my God.
Brutal on these streets.
Oof.
Let's move on to our final losing
Yes.
nominee. We have Margaret Sullavan for Three Comrades. So Margaret Sullavan is one of those actresses who only made a handful of films. She made 16 in total. She did a lot of stage work by comparison. And she died at the age of 50. So her career was cut pretty short. And I think a lot of classic film fans maybe have taken to Margaret Sullavan because of how few performances we have from her, and because she was very gifted as an actress and had these movies that people have seen, like The Shop Around the Corner is probably her most famous film. She was in The Good Fairy, which people have really praised her performance in that. I haven't seen it, but I've heard that she's very good. And she made 6 films before she made Three Comrades, and this is a film that is about soldiers in World War I who become friends, comrades, if you will. And but when they come home, they meet a woman named Patricia, who is Margaret Sullavan, who she sort of develops a relationship with these 3 guys, but especially Eric, played by Robert Taylor. And this is all taking place during the rise of Nazism in Germany. So there's kind of a threat of doom hanging over a lot of this, especially Patricia. She's contracting tuberculosis, which very much puts a time limit on her relationship with Eric. So that's the film. I mean, we have another melodrama here with a sad ending. What do we think of Margaret Sullavan?
I think she's very good, but I think that it is arguably category fraud. I think the movie actually needed to be longer because...
Wow, that does not get said very much.
I know. But like, I felt that, okay, so not to be cruel and sorry to these men, but I cannot tell Robert Taylor, Robert Young, and Robert Montgomery apart. There's a lot of Roberts in this period and with similar names. So, and Franchot Tone famously like is much better on stage, but like his films, he never just worked as a film actor, right? So we've 3 men who are very similar to me. We're being told they're different, and I actually can't tell them apart. So in my head, I'm going, this could be 2 men. But
she could be romancing all 3 of them, and I wouldn't even know it.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like,
Yeah,
it's like this is so novelty and not in a good way. It's like we need to cut some of these characters down. Beats are being repeated, and I think that she gets, as a result of us having to care about these 3 male characters, she gets introduced comparatively late. I feel for what I feel is supposed to be the female lead of the movie, you know, like it should be, she should be in the 2nd or 3rd scene. And I feel that like had this been paced like a 2.5-hour movie, it probably would have worked. And I had a feeling watching going, this is so like All Quiet on the Western Front, and it's by the same novelist, which it made a lot of things about it make sense. But yeah, she's really good. I think that there is like a spark there, and like going, I see what draws them to her, but I think again she's underserved by not having enough scenes. So like her character always feels like a bit of an enigma in a way that like she's supposed to have this draw over these 3 men in differing degrees. I never really quite see it because she never gets enough scenes with them. She gets the scenes with the one guy, whichever of the Roberts
Robert Taylor.
That's Barbara Stanwyck's husband, right?
Yes.
See, this is why there's so many Roberts.
There's too many Roberts. You're right.
Too many generic leading man Roberts. Like it's like I'd never confuse him with Robert Mitchum.
Yeah.
But
true.
See what I mean? Anyway, so like she is the most compelling part of this movie, I think, and also the addition by the screenwriter and producer Mankiewicz of the Nazi plotline in the background. I thought that was a really great addition, because the novel was published in 36, I believe, and the movie's 38. So it's a quick conveyor belt from like publication to movie production. And I guess it goes to show like how quickly and horrifyingly quickly the political landscape can change in so short a time. Even though this is set in the 20s, but like, I think that was a really great addition. Just as this really, it's like when you're watching Cabaret, right, where you're like, things are fine, they're going, oh, it's going to get so much worse than you can even possibly imagine. And coupled with Margaret Sullivan's terminal illness, it just adds this really, like, it's not even that they're living on borrowed time, it's just like the clock's ticking, and like, you know, it's just so like this hopelessness feeling that I think adds a lot to it.
I agree with that. Actually, you reminded me in terms of like screen time and amount to do. I wonder if a modern day, like if this film came out today, would she be campaign supporting and win, because she has so much screen time compared to other supporting nominees.
She's literally not even one of the titular roles, like.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's not the kind of thing like it's The Favorite, where it's like her character has like, is like, you know, like such a force that like I know she is sort of like having effects on all these men's lives, and that's what we're told like in the synopsis, but I don't feel it. Like I feel that like there's the one she marries,
right,
and that's kind of it. And I was expecting more like of a tangled like love quadrangle or something.
Square.
But like even that, I was kind of like, oh no, it's sweet, but like I was expecting more high stakes drama.
But I think she's very radiant here.
Yes,
that's what I came away from feeling with this one. I think she takes a part that could be pretty dour or just kind of blank because there's not a lot to do, and turns it into a pretty affecting kind of performance of this woman who has somewhat of a lively spirit, but she's not spunky. Like she's not like precocious. She just kind of,
it's not like a Manic Pixie Dream Girl type thing.
Right, which I was afraid this could end up being. Which in some respects, like trope-wise, maybe it tends to go a little bit into that, but she doesn't play it that way, I don't think. But she seems kind of just really haunted by her past in a way, and I think there's one point where like Robert Taylor comments on how she's always smiling, and she talks about becoming poor and eventually getting to a point of wanting to just live a happy life, even in spite of all the hardship that she may have faced. And that's something that could maybe come across as like a very dramatic, rehearsed kind of speech with some actresses, but there's something very modern, like I said way in the beginning of this show, and very raw, I would say, about her style. I think there's just almost a realism in her mannerisms and just the way she sort of casually can toss off a line and just make a conversation feel like a real conversation. And honestly, it really did surprise me, even though I know Margaret Sullavan is a good actress and everything, but knowing what her part was before watching it, I was wondering if she was just going to be the girl, quote unquote, and not really get a real characterization. And I think what she does here is a testament that she can elevate the material. Like, I mean, I look back on Merle Oberon in The Dark Angel, which is somewhat of a similar part, and I think it's a world of difference, quite frankly.
The thing I was thinking of was, like, much like White Banners, this movie is being sold to us based with the idea of, like, you've read the hit novel, like the fact that the background title screen shows the cover of the first edition of the American version of the novel, and then they even recreate that shot of the three guys' profiles like in the movie. So it's so like you've read the novel, like this is the thinking of everything going into it. So if you were going to go watch this, you were probably going to go watch this already. And I think that it's, you know, it's like, not, this is a bad comparison, it's like a 50 Shades of Grey type thing, right, where it's like if you're going to see this, you've read the book. No one is going to see this who like hasn't any context for the book. That's overstating it probably, but what I mean is that this part a lot of the decisions about this character for her have been made beforehand, and for her to be able to find something interesting in it is a real achievement, because it's the odds were not set up for her success.
Right. And I think it's important to note that this was adapted by F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yes.
This is one of his only credited screenplays.
Apparently it's the only one. And
Sullivan
hated his dialogue so much and said it was, I think her word was unrecitable, and demanded that it was rewritten, and it was, which,
there you go.
That's rough. But I believe it.
I do too. Yeah, I think there is very much a literary quality to it. Like, I think there's this repeated use of time and like watches and clocks, and which certainly sort of pays off in the last scene where she doesn't want to think about time anymore. She just wants to be in this sort of timeless void or whatever. There's also like some longer monologues, I think, and dialogues, just general wordiness. I would side with Margaret Sullavan in this situation.
From what I've learned about her, like, she seems like she was a real like Bette Davis-esque firecracker in that way, that people were terrified of her in the best way possible, which is, always a good quality in like a star.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think she even plays into some of the dark humor of the film pretty well. Like, the one I'm thinking of is when Robert Taylor calls her, I don't even know if it's him, it's probably one of the others, but one of them is calling her for the first time after they did their first little meeting from the weird road race thing that they got into. And she doesn't know who's calling. And he says, "I was the one who beat you," which is a strange way of phrasing it, understandably, which is about the road race itself. Sure. And just without missing a beat, she just says, "Oh, you must have the wrong woman," where she's like implying him like physically beating a woman. And she makes it, I think, very clear that she's sort of teasing him, but it's just moments like this where you do see some personality out of this character that could feel very predetermined, as you were saying before, like sort of constructed. Like, what this character serves is to sort of impact the lives of these men more so than her being a person herself, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. There was a moment I was quite fond of, which I'm a connoisseur of like good hospital bed lighting, which is like the thing. It's a particular kind of shot and setup and lighting setup in like movies of this period, which we don't do a lot of nowadays, which is the actress is lying in bed, so like everything is falling back into place, and you just get like this gorgeous, like, beautiful, like soft diffused filming, and it's there's that setup, but also added with the like I'm bravely battling this terrible illness. Like, it's inherently has drama, So obviously, like, whenever she's had her rib removal surgery to relieve her tuberculosis, but like looks flawless.
Oh, she's gorgeous.
It's like I actually think you look better.
Yeah.
And that was like a little bit ludicrous, but I wasn't mad at it. But it was definitely this is Nicole Kidman in Moulin Rouge dying of TB. Like, it's that level of like, you should look like other shit. I don't think she even coughs like once, does she?
In the last scene, I don't know. I don't think so. She does earlier on, but yeah, like once. Yeah, but yeah. But I mean, it's like we talked about literally last week with Greta Garbo and Camille. Like, it's very, very similar, and also very glamorous, that final deathbed scene. Yeah. But I think she does, even though she gets the glamorous treatment and the lighting and everything, I think she plays that final scene very well itself. Yes. I think she's very heartbreaking. I mean, even the part where she's like calling out to Eric because he's about to leave the room, and there's just this desperation in her to live. And obviously this is a big melodramatic moment that could very easily be very over the top and overplayed, but I think she makes it work. I think she really modulates the performance very well, and I think it's like a kind of performance that you look at it and maybe certain casual audience members might be like, well, she was good. I don't really see like why that is nomination worthy. But I think what she does actually is like she sort of makes you believe that this person is a person and not a construct.
I think she does seize the movie. Like
yeah.
By the end, you're like, oh, I'm invested in this story. She is like who I care about.
Right. So there you go. Also, apparently there was a big uptick in charitable donations to fight tuberculosis after the release of this film.
Yeah.
At least that's what Inside Oscar said. So, hey, there you go. Did some good in the world, Margaret Sullavan. And this review from the New York Post said, Miss Sullivan enters a very small company of movie actresses who can really act.
Good one.
So, more backhanded shade towards...
I wonder who else is on that list.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess Bette Davis. So, yeah, anything else on Margaret Sullavan?
She is an ex-wife of both Henry Fonda and William Wyler, which will come up in Jezebel. That's all I can add.
Let us move on to our winning performance of the year, Bette Davis for Jezebel. So I talked about it the first time we discussed Bette Davis. I love her. She's one of the very best to ever do it.
Yeah.
And it's always been interesting to look at the films that she won Oscars for, because it seems like a lot of people think she probably won for the wrong movies, especially Dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, people do defend this Jezebel win, but there is this feeling, at least from what I've seen in my circles, that some of her later work, I mean, even a few years later, like a Dark Victory, Now Voyager, Little Foxes.
Yeah. She's just gearing up for a great run of movies at this point in her career.
Right. Yeah. And then obviously All About Eve and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, that one of those performances maybe would have been better to reward her for. But before we talk about her performance here, what are your thoughts on the legend that is Bette Davis?
If you had to point to, if someone asked you what a movie star is, and you had to come up with an example, it's her. It's someone who just like, you watch them do anything and they can do anything, even the most mundane thing, and you're just riveted by what they do. And she's that. Like few people did it better. There's people who I personally like more, but that's like my personal choice. Whereas like with Bette Davis, it's like, no, like there's probably one of the greatest that ever lived, like without any real like debate needed.
Yeah.
And like, and to her credit as well, like not only is she great, like she has a run of great movies where there's people who are great, like Joan Crawford, for instance, who actually or Marilyn Monroe, who actually only have a very few amount of truly great movies. There's movies that they're good in, but a lot of their movies are actually not very good. Whereas Bette has just so many good ones. And not a lot of people get lucky enough to do that.
Yeah. And I think part of that is that she demanded
to
have these quality parts.
And Jezebel's a real turning point in her career, because she obviously wins the second Oscar, but like at this point she uses that win to parlay for consistently great roles, but also better pay, and like it really elevates her like status at the studio and allows her to cement her position as like Queen of Warner Brothers, you know, making women's pictures at a studio that does not make women's pictures.
Yeah, she had that niche.
Yeah,
all to herself,
and to be able to forge that, like that takes star power, will.
Oh yeah, for sure. And a lot of chutzpah.
Exactly.
So Jezebel, I think, has been thought of as a film that was offered to Bette Davis to make up for the fact that she was not cast in Gone with the Wind, which you could certainly say that this is a precursor to Gone with the Wind. Southern setting, female lead character who has like a tempestuous side, and the love triangle. There's even some racist elements. Like it's all there pretty much. It's
and Hollywood
very
has
similar.
Definitely Gone with the Wind mad at this point. It's like those knockoff Not Finding Nemo movies you see that get released when that would be very neat. I think obviously Jezebel has actual merit, but I think this is a degree that quick get out before Gone with the Wind comes out. We'll get all our Southern Belle movies out.
Right.
Because I don't know, is the whole like her getting this as a consolation for not getting Scarlett O'Hara, is that like actually true, or has it been like
it's been suggested? I don't know if it's like,
I feel like it might be embellished over the years.
Yeah,
because
I think that's probably the
yeah,
case.
like the way, because the way, everyone always talks about how close they were to, like, I think Katharine Hepburn has a story that she almost got. It's like, well, that's like never gonna happen. Like
I would
like
have loved to have seen that interpretation,
yeah,
let
or
me tell
even, or like,
you.
like Mae West. It's like, I'm sorry, like this.
Oh my God.
There's,
Yeah.
there's that ludicrous Wikipedia list, and it's like everyone, and it doesn't really say like to the levels to which they were considered. So I think they count like even people that were like, spitballed in a meeting, but it's like, no, they're never.
Right.
Like, I think Gloria Swanson's in there. It's like people where it's like, this would never happen. Like, this just never, ever, ever, ever happen.
Right.
But because that's become such a myth, like every actress in Hollywood wanted it. But I think that it probably, I don't know, I think the amount that Davis was involved in actually wanting that and going for it, I think is probably a little overstated.
Probably. But also, I think this film is also a result of her ongoing battle with Warner. It's not just after this, that this has been happening ever since her first Oscar win, where she felt like the material was still subpar. And it got to the point where she broke her contract and went off to London and was in breach of contract and had to pay. But when she came back, she got the good material that she was asking for. So there you go. But this film, it's about a Southern belle, Julie, who is engaged to Prez, played by Henry Fonda. She attends this social event in a red satin dress.
The Olympus Ball.
Yes.
I have to look
yes.
up. I need to look up the name.
Yes, the best event of the year, apparently, in this town, where she's supposed to be wearing like a virginal white dress because she's not married yet, and it causes a big scandal, and he breaks it off with her and heads to the north and eventually comes back with a wife, but Julie wants him back, and she tries to like orchestrate this duel. It's kind of odd how this sort of gets misconstrued, but essentially the other part of this love triangle is Buck, and he ends up dying because of this situation. And eventually there's a yellow fever epidemic and people have to go to quarantine. Prez gets sick and Julie decides to be by his bedside and sort of have to go off to this leper colony, and essentially is sacrificing herself in some sort of gesture to like make up for the sins of the past sort of thing, so that she can take care of him. Another big melodrama. William Wyler, he's someone who's directed a number of actresses to Best Actress wins. This was the first.
He's the director who's directed the most actors in total to Oscar wins.
There you go. So he was a real actor's director for sure. Yeah. But what's your take on the film itself and her take on this role?
So when I first watched it, I remember thinking that I felt I preferred it to Gone with the Wind. And then I recently rewatched Gone with the Wind. It's like they're both doing slightly different things. I think that Jezebel ends in a more interesting place. Not more interesting, that's the wrong way to say it. Jezebel ends in an interesting place, and it's not just like a pale imitator. It's got a great character at its core, much like Gone with the Wind. I think that some of the motivations, but specifically at the end when she suddenly becomes good, it's like it's not quite a successful payoff. Like I felt we needed a scene or two more of just, because she goes from just being like full Bette Davis, like absolute monster for most of the movie, right? Just capricious, vindictive, selfish. And then suddenly when Prez gets yellow fever, she's like, tells his wife, no, I'll go with them. It's just like, I don't quite know what this is supposed to mean and say, it's like, you're his wife, but I'll also be his wife now that he's potentially dangerously ill. It didn't really make sense. I think Davis sold it, but I was just more like, it's like, I don't know what's happening here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
And I think that's more of a writing thing. I think like Wendy Hiller, I think she excels through the whole film. Like, I do certainly prefer her in the beginning where she's truly having a ball with the sort of bitchiness of her character. The moments where like she's arriving at the party and she takes off her coat and reveals her satin red dress.
Yeah. Although this movie does a thing which only rarely happens, but I hate it in that respect, which is when a black and white movie talks about colors. and shows you the
Yeah,
colors.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah. It also happens in The Heiress, ironically enough, like another William Wyler movie where an actress wins a Best Actress Oscar. But it's that it's just like it's because like it's such a thing, and you're like going, this would be great if I knew what color it was or if I could see it. Like especially since that whole sequence is so like when she's dancing around in the red dress. Like I bet this looks beautiful in color. It's very striking, but sort of like it's not as effective as it could be, and I don't know how they would rectify it, but that's just unfortunate.
You really wish there was color in especially scenes like this, but she still communicates just the smugness.
Yes.
Just the sense of satisfaction on her face to be like being such a stunt queen in this moment. But then also when it gets to the point where she is kind of humbled a little bit and she has to dance in front of everybody, I think she plays in that sort of weird territory really well of like not really knowing what's going on but sort of trying to put up a brave face.
I do like how her and Henry Fonda are a lot more toxic than say Scarlett and Rhett are. Whereas with Scarlett and Rhett, Scarlett is all like affectations and full of it, and Rhett like is really trying but also sees through it and is able to like knows how to push her buttons, so you're kind of like, ooh, this is really sexy, this fun repartee, and like you're actually invested in these scenes, whereas like Julie is mean and selfish, but also like Henry's quite cruel in his own way, like whenever he's punishing her and like humiliating her in a way that's like, I don't think he should put up with it, but at the same time it's like this feels like really and which can be fine narratively, but it's like I feel we're supposed to like this character, or at least like him in as much as she likes him, and I'm like, it's like, I don't know, he seems cold and weird.
Yeah. First of all, I do not think that Henry Fonda is very good in this, to be quite honest.
No, he's not particularly good.
I think that's a part of it, that it's just the vibes are off, just bad vibes overall.
Did he and Davis have an affair, I think?
I think I read that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a tangle where it's like Wyler was trying to distance himself from her, so she like to spite Wyler has an affair with Fonda, and it's just like, oh, yeah, Betty, so messy.
What a tangled web we weave.
Exactly.
Yes. What I think is at the heart of this character, even though we kind of skip over the part where like she's really grieving over the loss of him going off to the north, we sort of just are like, hey, now it's 1 year later. We don't really like stop down and explore like her growth into trying to be like a better person, or at least coming off that way. And to sort of try to attract him again when he's back.
This really does feel like a most actress win, because it's like it's like, and we have a scene and she's doing stuff, but you don't really quite know how we got here. Like it feels like some of the connective tissue, like in like the actual like plotting and stuff. So like individual scenes are great, but you're just sort of like, yeah, like I don't really quite buy this transformation that we've witnessed.
No, not at all. But I think what she is she is white. She can use the privileges that she has in this society to get what she wants. And like, even when he comes back, and she may be like more apologetic and all of that, but it's still a manipulation tactic that she's using, at least based on how she's playing it. There is a desperation there, and she's vulnerable, but I think you're always seeing the wheels turning with this character.
Yes.
And it's like she's arranged this whole charade of wearing a white dress and preparing for his return, and she's got it all planned out. And then reality sets in when he reveals that he has a wife. And I think like I said, I think she sort of excels in those moments of like her suddenly not being in control and having that a little bit of embarrassment and just having to grapple with that. I think even those subtler moments that her face really communicates really well without her having to say anything. It's my favorite aspect.
You're very right, and you can tell those are the William Wyler bits as opposed to like the script bits where it's like, this is like, this is how you take a play and like actually make it a movie, right? Like and I think this is probably definitely what's setting her performance apart from it being a flop play starring Miriam Hopkins, you know, like, which is what it started life as. So like, it's definitely elevated material.
Yeah. I'd say another highlight, even though, again, the transformation doesn't make sense. But just, again, going back to, like you said, individual scene-wise, if you can, like, isolate it and watch it on YouTube, you'd be like, wow, that's a really great acting scene for Bette Davis. I like the staircase scene at the end between her and Amy. I think just the strength of her convictions in that moment, like, even though she hasn't really earned maybe the transformation because of the way this film is written, she still maintains like this sense of conviction and that like she's already made up her mind about what she wants to do.
And I think she manages to say it in a way that like I see how Amy's convinced and I'm kind of convinced, where it's like, no, Amy, you'll die. You will die. I might live.
Yeah.
And it's
right.
like, I think that the fact that she's just so frank about that, whereas it could easily just be like this tedious, like long melodramatic thing about love and who loves who and all this stuff, but just the fact that it's like, no, this place is hell on earth. Like you won't survive.
Right.
And then just that great procession as like they're bringing all like the sick to like the island colony, like going, this is ghoulish, and you're like, this is how we end the movie. It's like this is a horror movie now, and like it's to end at that bit, whereas a lot of other movies, either a melodramatic ending or like a crying in the arms of holding your dead lover, or like, you know, walking onto the sunset together. It's like you can have that, but this is just so like I can't even say anything. You're just like, I'm chilled to the bone. Like it's just so
it's very haunting ending. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's really good. I think that's why when I first saw it, like I was like, oh my god, this is so good. Like this is so unfair. Gone with the Wind. They're doing different things, but like and I think it's because like when I watched it first, it's only ever talked about in the shadow of Gone with the Wind, which I think is doing a huge disservice, because like they're not the same thing. They're not doing the same things.
Just surface level wise, you can make the comparison, but
there's a few sort of similar things, but like not particularly. I think because wait, if I'm remembering this right, the war doesn't actually happen in Jezebel, does it? It's about to happen.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, that was it. I knew that's what I thought the main, because so like it's not even a Civil War movie.
But like they sort of are talking about
that was
like,
it, because
the difference in ideals between the North and the South and all that.
Fonda has that similar speech that Clark Gable gives, where it's like the South has industry and like we rely on slave labor, and it's like we're not going to stand a chance. Like he has that whole thing, and all of a sudden there's like, why you can't say that? It's like, but that's the truth.
Right. But this interesting review I found from the New York Times from 1938, we should mention, said Jezebel would have been considerably more effective, in my opinion, if its heroine had remained unregenerate to the end. So,
wow.
I mean, I saw another review from Variety which said a similar thing. Like, they didn't really buy the transformation to her being like a better person, quote unquote, at the end.
So in that case, how do you think that ending should go? Like, do you think it should be like, as in his wife is about to step on to like the play card and she just pushes her off and jumps on? Like I'm trying to think.
Sure. That'd be fun.
Something similar, like locks her in a bedroom or something. But I mean, that's all. That's, you know, bordering on slapstick. But I do think though that like they do want to underline that like somehow she's grown a conscience, and I would much rather. You know, like it would be much more effective if she's like, no, I want him. Like,
right,
you don't understand this. I want him. You're just the wife. Like if it was like so much more villainous like that, where it's like, I don't care.
Yeah,
he's mine.
He's mine. Back off.
Yeah, like I think that would be. I mean, obviously that is indefensible, like under the production code. Like, there's no way, even though she's possibly effectively going to her death. Like, it's still. Yeah. They still wouldn't be able to justify something like that.
No, but I love that alternate ending. But anyway, let's get to why we think Bette Davis won this Oscar. I mean, I feel like we more or less outlined, like you said, most acting in this case. She gets so much. I mean, if you want to talk about like Oscar scenes, like that's what the whole film is for her.
the joke my boyfriend always have, and I, whenever we watch a movie, especially one that has either been nominated for an Oscar or like is going to be whoever, you know, the kind of thing of one that won't. It's always like there's the scene, right, where it's like, and the nominees are, and like it's they clip the bit where the character gives them all like, this is what I am saying what my character is and what my motivations are in a way that can be clipped out. Like, it's that moment, and she has about 6 of those in this movie.
Yeah. Take your pick, really.
Exactly. And most people only get one, you know?
Yes, exactly. I don't know. I mean, I think this year does have its fair share of
Mm-hmm.
Oscar-y scenes, but
Yeah.
for her, it really is like the whole performance
Mm-hmm.
is her full force. Bette Davis, I'm a movie star, just like wipe everyone out.
Mm-hmm.
And she was expected to win this Oscar going into it, so this was not a surprise win.
Mm-hmm.
But we did have Margaret Sullavan winning the New York Film Critics Award for Best Actress,
Mm-hmm.
so there was that.
And
Also, Wendy Hiller came in second.
and also Norma won the Volpe Cup at Venice.
So there was, if you want to say precursors in 1938,
They're
there
few,
were at least
they're few and far between, but they are there. Yeah.
yeah, right. So Bette Davis didn't really win anything like that before the Oscars, but it's interesting that even despite that, she was still like, oh, obviously it's going to be Bette Davis. Like this is it.
It's the first nomination in her like record-setting 5 nomination run where she's nominated 5 years in a row, and the only person ever to match that is Greer Garson, 1941 to 45. So this is sort of like to say like the Davis is like at the beginning, at the peak of like her career as the Hollywood leading lady, right? I actually because the with the up until the 1940 ceremony, they used to let extras vote for the Oscars. So so that's why Walter Brennan has 3 Oscars, right? Because he was popular. And I think it helps people like Davis as opposed to Wendy Hiller win, wherein that like anyone that has a Hollywood career and is like like a working Hollywood actor as an American, the odds are kind of already in their favor anyway, as in like if they like you personally, which is what a lot of these probably extra type votes will be, where it's like it's not even like people who have a whole lot of power, and it's just like people where it's like, oh, she's nice, or I like her. Like it could be for very like whimmy reasons,
Yeah.
Which is to say that I understand how Davis wins this award, even just based on that, even though maybe there's other people, specifically Hiller, who I think have just as good a shot.
I think that's probably true. I do think it's also important to note the studio influence in general in this, especially this decade. Like we just got done talking about Louise Reiner's 2 wins, and she had the full force of MGM behind her both times. Like even last, like the 1937, like Greta Garbo was nominated for Camille, and she was also MGM, but they were just like, no, it's we're all on Louise. But she has Warner Brothers behind her, very powerful studio.
She's like their only major leading lady.
Yeah. I think also that maybe there was some feeling that because of what happened where people thought her win for Dangerous was a makeup win, that this could be seen as a little bit more of a legitimate win for her.
Potentially, yeah.
And their first opportunity to do so, they did it. So
like I understand that. I think sometimes some of this is like kind of like putting a lot of how we view the Oscars onto like early 30s, which was even though by 38 the idea of like an Oscar winning role had crystallized, but like you see it parodied in A Star Is Born. So like they're making movies about people winning Oscars. So like there is a degree of self-awareness about what an Oscar winning role is. But I do think with like a lot of these ones up until around this period, like, and I count Dangerous as one of these where it's like individual wins and losses, it's sort of nominations, they're kind of like it's all a bit of a crapshoot, really. Like arguably Katharine Hepburn is a supporting role in Morning Glory. Like there's a few ones like that where you're like going, this could have gone either way. This is by far not even their best movie of this year, but somehow it's in this running. Like, and it's again because they don't quite know, I think, what a best actor, best actress winning roles and performance should be. But yeah, it's like the 35 Dangerous one is, I don't hold that much against it, even though it's one of her not great movies.
Yeah. Well, we have a few questions to get to. Let's get right to it. All right. So this is from Zeta Short, starting big here. Is this the greatest Best Actress lineup of all time?
Okay. So I said I was very non-committal in these questions because I like movies. I like so many. So I did decide to go through and just like point out ones where I think this is a good lineup, this is a good lineup. And of the 93 ceremonies, I came up with 17. So I'm not a good
Okay.
So the best I can say if you want to pin me down is like it's in the upper echelon.
It's in the top 18.
Yeah.
First of all, I love that another person actually asked this exact question last week. I hope we just keep this tradition alive and I keep getting this question every week. But no, I really am a fan of these performances for the most part, but I would not say it's top 10 even,
Yeah.
personally. But I still think it's like great.
Like there's always a fourth and fifth place ones where it's kind of like I guess we gotta make up the numbers, and some of them are that, but obviously there's definitely a fifth place one in this lineup.
Exactly.
And yeah, like sorry. Faye.
Yeah.
She won an Oscar that night. It worked out fine for her.
Exactly. This is from Chelsea. Does this feel like one of those underrated great years for actresses?
I think it does, mostly because of the presence of Wendy Hiller's Eliza Doolittle, which I think echoes down, to this day. Like, every single TV show does an episode where someone gets someone a makeover and it's called My Fair something, like there's an episode of Frasier called My Fair Frasier. Like it's, I know it's My Fair Lady, not necessarily Pygmalion, but the point is that the strands of that performance is still like permeating down to say in a way that I don't think many of the other ones are.
That's true.
The only people who know Jezebel are Bette Davis fans, which is dismissive, but like in general. They're the people who are watching this movie, whereas a lot of people watch Gone with the Wind, not necessarily people who are fans of Vivien Leigh. And yeah, similarly with Marie Antoinette, like only Norma Shearer fans are watching that.
Fair. I mean, this is sandwiched between two really iconic Best Actress categories, for me at least. I think 1937 is really great, outside of Louise Reiner. And 1939 is really good too. So
I wanted to say though, like just for 37, like it's a pity because I always feel bad because I think The Good Earth is actually a good story. It's just the casting is like, indefensible. It's just like, I would love this to be remade because it's actually saying lots of really great things in ways I haven't seen before.
Talked about it.
Yeah, like it's so good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Look, it's based on a Pulitzer Prize winning novel.
And the lady won Pearl Buck won the Nobel Prize later that year. Like it's good.
Yeah. But as far as the 38 nominations, I think 4 out of 5 really good performances.
Yeah.
Fay Bainter is also there. I think she's decent. Like, she's not bad by any means. I don't hate that performance, but no, I think people should give this lineup a look. I mean, I wouldn't even say like another look because probably some people haven't seen most of these to begin with. But I also don't think there's like a super obvious winner here, where it's just like Olivia de Havilland in The Heiress is like obviously going to win that competition 100 times out of 100.
Like the role later won a Tony in the 90s. Like it's there's certain roles where it's like this is it's unstoppable.
But I think that's something though that if there's like a super obvious winner, I don't consider it an iconic lineup because it's just like one towers over the rest. Whereas here, I think
every other woman nominated in 1939.
Fair. Yes, but we'll get to that. John T said, if Davis somehow loses for this, does she ever get a second trophy? And if so, when?
Ooh.
Good question.
Well, what would you say?
I mean, I would imagine she would get a second one eventually.
Yeah.
If the rumors are true, from what I've read from about 1939, she actually was close to beating Vivien Leigh.
Wow.
I don't know how true that is, but it's something that I've read.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, I imagine almost any of her films from the 40s could have gotten her a second win.
I think
on her hot streak.
I think in particular, The Letter.
Yeah, okay.
Just because Ginger Rogers win that year is often seen as a bit inexplicable, even though, like, I see why she won.
Yeah.
But, like, The Letter is, like, so good. It's like, it's a melodrama, but, like, it's great, and it's sexy, and, like, it's... And it's, as much as it is one of the great Bette Davis melodramas, it's the least melodramatic of her melodramas, I feel.
True.
And then maybe she could have won for All About Eve, but that's also I feel that's quite, like, an obvious answer. Even though I would rather Gloria Swanson won.
Same.
Yeah.
This is from Marcel. In terms of Bette Davis films, I've unfortunately only watched Of Human Bondage and All About Eve. Which performances would you recommend to someone who is shamefully insufficient in terms of Davis, but loved her in All About Eve?
Okay. Bette Davis performances I would recommend, and I'm gonna say like the good Bette Davis performances.
Okay.
As in like these are good films, not like ones that's like I enjoy this, but it's not a good film, you know? Like I'm not gonna say like The Anniversary, which is fun but wacky.
Yeah.
I'd say The Letter, absolutely. Dark Victory, and now Voyager for like the true Bette Davis melodrama greatness, like the classic Bette Davises. And Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is pretty great, as in for late Davis. Yeah, just to keep the list short, I suppose. Because when you've seen All About Eve, it's like, well, you've seen probably the one most essential one. I would say, like the career-defining one.
I would say, as strange as it is to start later, that I feel like an easy way of going into it is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I don't know. It just feels like the most fun to watch in general to ease yourself into like totally going full force into Bette Davis.
I think it's also interesting where if you've learned about her mostly from like drag queens and stuff who often draw from like late Bette Davis, so lots of shouting and like the stuff like that.
Right.
Baby Jane is the closest to that while still being really good.
Right.
Yeah, and you're right. It's like working backwards is like a good idea, because then of course you get to see things like, oh, this is when she's young and hot and like the biggest movie star in the world, you know?
Right.
Yeah, that's also a very constructive way.
Yeah, but I like all those you said. Little Foxes ranks right up there for me.
I'm a bit iffy on it because I think it's a bit silly in places. Her makeup gets a bit silly, and I'm just like, this looks a bit much.
Yeah, but I think it's fun, at least. And, you know, Jezebel, we just talked about it. Well, let's move on to Christoph N. How did Fay Bainter get a double nomination for lead and supporting back in the very early years when there was still a strict sense of lead is for stars and supporting is character actors and up-and-comers?
I think it was the thing I said before, where because she was a very established stage actress before she started doing movies, I think that she hadn't gone through the kind of stratifying parts of the Hollywood machinery that typically happens like that. So like,
yeah.
And it's this kind of thing where like she is a lead talent, but she is at an age where it doesn't have the looks basically to be a leading lady in the classic Hollywood sense, which is, you know, freaking horrible. But like I imagine that's how they approached it. But I think it also just meant that, you know, a lot of these early ceremonies are very chaotic with who gets nominations in what. The supporting category is very new. They, you know, as in like, how do you define what's supporting? So like we were saying. Yeah. I think in White Banner she arguably is supporting, but it also doesn't. But she's not a character actor, so what is this?
And I think she had just goodwill from both films in general, that they were sort of like mutually beneficial to each other.
Yeah, because she's nice. She's nice,
and she was a leading lady on Broadway, so like, you know.
Yeah, and the thing you have to remember, right, is that the nominees for individual categories are decided by people who are working, like actors. The acting branch decides the nominations for the acting categories,
right? Which
is how Geraldine Page got 8 nominations before finally winning. You know, it's like, because it means that there can be people who actors like, but aren't necessarily famous.
And this is a good example.
Yeah.
Owen Daly said, why is Wendy Hiller so perfect as Eliza, and why is Fay Bainter not discussed enough as a great of all time? Well, we certainly talked a lot about how Wendy Hiller is perfect as Eliza. I don't really think we need to repeat ourselves.
She's perfect. She's perfect in everything. Like Man for All Seasons, Murder in the Orient Express, I Know Where I'm Going, Major Barbara. She's just great.
If I may be cliche of a certain phrase of the moment, she always understands the assignment.
Absolutely. Like, especially Murder in the Orient Express. I think that's a great example where it's like, because like everyone's supposed to be doing characters and has a secret. And like, she's like, you know, I'm an old Russian princess, and she's like kind of cutting and fabulous. And, you know, like, and she doesn't really do a lot. Like, she just sort of like delivers some lines in a weirdly florid way, but also like quite like aloof. And it's like, you're pretty fab.
Yeah. I think Fay Bainter is just too low-key to really be like someone that people love very much. And as far as like a great of all time, I wouldn't really put her there. So
there is like movie stardom, right? And that is different from stage
yeah,
stardom. And some people have both, some people only have one.
right.
I think with Faye, because actually, this is what I meant to say on this thing. There's that great interview that Bette Davis did in 1972 on the Dick Cavett show, where it's a very Dick Cavett long interview about like her life and career and stuff. And she said that they never managed to get out of Fay Bainter on screen what they would see on stage. Like she was always better on stage, and I feel that that's at its core what it is. Like I think it's just Cherry Jones is similar, right? Like she's one of the great stage actresses of her generation.
I love Cherry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she's always fabulous when she turns up in TV and stuff, but they've never quite had a film role good enough for her.
Yeah. Sadly true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mark Lamb said, I like Shearer and the movie, but would she have had a better chance if Thalberg had lived? Or was one Oscar all she was thought to deserve?
Okay. So my central thing is I don't like repeat wins. Like, I find them futile. I don't think that they tend not to enhance people's careers. Like, they just seem a bit unnecessary,
excessive.
in my opinion. Yeah. So it's going to be tough for me to say in any way that Shearer deserves the Oscar because, like, well, she already has one. I think Thalberg being alive wouldn't have mattered because Thalberg, while is like legendary, was not actually famous. Like, he famously never had his name on any other credits of the movies he produced. So I think that in many ways maybe him being dead helped her because there's the sympathy of her being the beautiful widow, right? You don't need to know who the husband is. If we know she's a widow, it's like, oh, that's so sad for her.
Yeah, maybe I think partly the nomination comes from some element of sympathy for her as well.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine she could have been supported by the power of Irving Thalberg and the MGM machine if he was still alive, so that maybe she could have contended more, but
I think altogether her odds are probably more or less similar.
Yeah, exactly. Christoph N. said, can you believe that this is the last time you're talking about Norma Shearer after talking about her in every other episode for quite a while? Also, which is the best of her nominations? First of all, we talked about it. Marie Antoinette is easily her best for me. And like I said before, I'm a little sad that I'm done with Norma after this. I mean, I've talked about a lot of like the one-off nominees that I never talk about again after one episode, like Margaret Sullavan in this case, or Fay Bainter. But Norma's been like such a mainstay since the 1930 episode, and now it's the end of an era.
Yeah, like there's people who are in fashion, right? And they have like there's periods where they're nominated for a lot. And in the 30s it's Norma, like in the 40s it's Bette Davis, in the 80s it's Glenn Close and Jessica Lange and Sissy Spacek and even Meryl Streep. Like there's people who turn up a lot and they help.
And Meryl Streep from the 80s to today.
That's why I said last time. It's like this kind of doesn't work with my point, but it sort of still stands.
Right.
But yeah, like in the 70s, it's like, Diane Keaton or not Diane Keaton, like Faye Dunaway or something. There's people who you need to tell that's the era, right? Jane Fonda,
right.
Like, stuff like that.
And this was hers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's the end of an era, I think, with this and Greta Garbo, her last nomination in 1939 coming up. It's the real closing of a chapter of like a certain type of like studio propped up star that really thrived in the 30s. It's
also a specifically MGM thing too, right? With the death of Thalberg and how like, Mayer just like pilfered his to-do pile for years afterwards, and like the problems only became apparent in the late 40s, and that's around the time when Mayer's ousted.
Right. So this is from Sophia Simonello. If Marion Davies ended up playing Marie Antoinette as Hearst originally hoped for before their move to WB, do you think she would have earned an Oscar nomination? Do you think she would have been better than Norma in the role?
No. No, like, I like Marion, and I know that, like, obviously she has been done dirty by history, and her talent has always been dismissed, but I think she was a much better comedian than a dramatic actress, and I think while the story of Marie Antoinette can have moments of levity, it can't be a comedy.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if people really took Marion Davies seriously enough, so...
Yeah.
I don't know. I think maybe she could have been capable of it if she really invested a lot in the character, but
But it would be.
I'm gonna say that I'm happy that Norma had this role.
Exactly.
That's all I'll say.
I think if Margaret Davis had did it, it would be like a reverse Garbo Laugh situation. You know, it would have to be such a this is a turning point in her career. You know, like, and few people manage to achieve that anyway. So I don't think the odds, and I don't think the odds, and at this point, there's not at this point. Sorry, but like, given how things are going to go for her in the 40s, it's like, odds are not in her favor.
Right. This is from Gabe Guarin. Was Margaret Sullavan nominated for the right movie?
Do you think so? Because I haven't seen enough of her movies. I think that The Shop Around the Corner could have done it with a nomination.
I mean, I didn't know if this meant like from 1938. Was she nominated for the right movie or just in her career? I wasn't really sure.
I think she's in a movie called The Shining Hour that year. No.
Yeah, and The Shop War an Angel.
Yeah. Maybe it's the thing I was saying where it's like, this is this category fraud? Like, because there is like, maybe she's got more where she's more a lead. But I think that making the case of her being a lead actress, I think The Shop Around the Corner, which is like, you know, you've got male type thing, she's Meg Ryan, James Stewart is Tom Hanks. That's a more focused film in like who are the leads and what is happening, and they are ultimate. Whereas Three Comrades is kind of about a lot of things. You know, like it's kind of about post-war Germany. It's kind of about the rise of Nazism. It's kind of about like the metaphor for like
tuberculosis.
Yeah, it's kind of like a metaphor for German industry after the war. It's just there's a lot of like things, and like it's the focus is confused. And I think it's that like she might be the best actress in it. She's also the only actress in it.
Very true.
Yeah.
Right. Andrew Carden, did any of the four daughters deserve a nomination? So I watched this. I remember watching it. I can't remember any of their performances, so I'm going to say no.
The only one I know is Priscilla Lane, and I only know her from Arsenic and Old Lace. So
yeah, okay.
And the other two are. See, I didn't know that there was 4 Lane sisters, and that 3 of the Lane sisters are in this. I only know this movie because Michael Curtiz got 2 Best Director nominations that year, and it's one of the few times that's happened. Sometime, yeah. I can't say. I'll
say no.
Yeah, I'd say no.
This is from K Flea 208. Do you think Katharine Hepburn was a snub this year for bringing up Baby? And if so, who would she replace in this lineup?
Katharine Hepburn was absolutely not a snub. Like, Bring Up Baby was a disastrous flop and hated, right?
It was.
Yeah.
Yes, at the time.
Yeah. It has a lot of merit, but like all of that is retrospective. Like
right.
If she was going to push anyone out, it would be Fay Bainter, and it wouldn't be for Bring Up Baby. It would be for Holiday.
Well, you already got ahead of the other question about this from Luke Val. Not that Katharine Hepburn had any chance in hell in getting nominated at this time. Which film, Bring Up Baby or Holiday, do you think she was most likely to get in for? And which of them do you think she should have gotten nominated for?
It's Holiday, right?
Okay.
Like the character has a little bit more going on. It's a Philip Barry play who goes on to write the Philadelphia story for her. So like the groundwork is there. But like Bring Up Baby, Susan Vance, while fun, she is a fully one-dimensional character. You know, like there's not a whole lot there.
I really like Bring Up Baby a lot. So like just in terms of like, I would love for that to be one of her nominations because it's like so broad and she never really went that broad again in her career that I sort of just like, it would be nice to have her here instead of Fay Bainter. I won't lie. Like, you know, but I definitely think Holiday would have been more likely for sure.
I mean,
and that's also a previous Best Actress nominated role as we talked about in the 4th Academy Awards.
But of course, Holiday flopped by this point because we're long into the Great Depression, and like that whole like rich people saying they don't want to work doesn't really resonate. So like,
right?
Like but the thing is, that's aside from that is of course what contributed to the movie's flop. That's also like against her favor for this nomination. You know, it's like people aren't going to respond to that. But that is the one that I think will be nominated.
And there were some feelings about her being box office poison and whatnot. I don't really think she came close.
No.
Sadly. But all right, well, let's get to our final segment here.
Yeah.
Where of course we're running long as we have been lately, but that's okay. No, it's been a very fun discussion. Who do we think was the runner-up to Bette Davis here? I think you can make a case for a few of these.
It's Fay
But
Bainter,
what
of
do you
course.
think? Okay, well,
No.
I'd love to hear you argue that.
No, it's Wendy Hiller. It's Wendy Hiller, I think. For me. I think realistically, it might be Norma Shearer if we're going to go like based on people in Los Angeles County who are voting for this award. Like I think Leslie Howard had a better chance of winning Best Actress or Best Actor than because he has like the name recognition of like being quite popular, whereas Wendy has a tougher sell.
Yeah.
Even though the brilliance of her performance like is self-evident, like I just feel that Norma maybe has a slightly better chance, even though I want Wendy to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Wendy Hiller was the runner-up. I do. I think the combined factor of her being such an interesting discovery and the film getting into Best Picture, not that always translates to like automatically people who are in Best Picture elevate beyond those who aren't. But when you look at the other films in the lineup, it's only Pygmalion and Jezebel that are nominated in picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the support of the film itself definitely helped a lot, and the screenplay win suggested that they really responded to this film very positively. And Norma Shearer, she had already won and her career was fading,
mm-hmm.
and maybe people consider this a sympathy nomination in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Not that has to do with her performance itself, because I think she's excellent.
Well,
but
the movie was also a huge hit, so that's kind of like thinking.
That's true.
Informing my thinking of the fact that, like, I think that she has a better chance than maybe we think she does.
Yeah. I would say she's third, personally. And Margaret Sullavan, despite the critic win, I don't know if she really had, like, a solid narrative.
No.
Beyond that.
No.
And Fay Bainter is happy to be there, and she won an Oscar that night.
Exactly.
So she's happy. It's fine.
Of all the losers, it's like, well, you're the biggest winner of these losers, so
That's true. Yeah. So final question: who would you have voted for if you had the ballot?
I mean, Wendy. Probably. It's tough.
Yeah.
Because if it was me, a simple British Irish person in Hollywood in the 30s, I'd pick for some, I'd want to represent.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, I think it would be tough for me to call, because I think also as well, like, the Davis-ness of it all. We look at Davis as the legend, right? Like, we look at her and we see fundamentally not only how good she is, but all the greatness she does after it. And it's also like, because of this movie, like, it does allow her to elevate her career to a new level. And I think that, yeah, it can sometimes be hard to look upon with fresh eyes.
Yeah. I really struggled when I had to figure out who I would reward here, because for me it is between three, actually, which I'm taking out Fay Bainter and Margaret Sullavan in this case.
Sure.
I think Norma Shearer, Wendy Hiller, or Bette Davis would have been great winners. I just think for the sheer fact of how many nominations Bette Davis has and what I will probably be rewarding her for in the future, I'm not going to go with her in this case.
Yeah.
I think personally Wendy Hiller slightly more than Norma Shearer for me. And it pains me to say that, because Norma Shearer, she has 6 nominations, and I wouldn't have given her the win for any of them. And this is her pinnacle, like I said, but
my thinking is as well, like, it's also, I don't think you have to sweat the competition that much in this case, because, like, all 3 of these women win Oscars in their careers, so, like,
this is true.
Like,
yeah, they're all taken care of.
Yeah, it's like no one's like exactly like left out in the cold here.
The only one is you could say is Margaret Sullavan, because Fay Bainter won for supporting.
Exactly. So it's like it's there's sometimes when the competition comes out going, oh, this is cruel, like, obviously any Glenn Close year, and you're just like, oh god, or a Peter O'Toole year, and it's just like, this isn't one of the harder ones, I think.
Right. So Wendy Hiller gets my vote. Congrats, Wendy Hiller.
Good.
We're on simpatico here.
Yes.
So that's good. All right.
Good for her.
Woo. Yes, good for her. Dash, thanks for joining me. This was great.
Yeah, I love this.
Yes.
Thanks.
So tell the people where they could find more of you on the internet.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Dashiell Silva, and you can also find me on Instagram at the same handle. I'm most active on Twitter, and
yes,
I tweet far too much.
Same. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, and the podcast is at Oscar Runner-Up on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram at @andtherunnerup_is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. Next week, it's the season finale already, and we'll be talking about a very important year in film history, 1939, and a very strong Best Actress race. Maybe the winner was obvious, but who was the runner-up? The nominees were Bette Davis for Dark Victory, Irene Dunne for Love Affair, Greta Garbo for Ninotchka, Greer Garson for Goodbye, Mr. Chips, and Vivien Leigh for Gone with the Wind, with the winner, of course, being Vivien Leigh. So that is what to watch before next week. Thanks again, Dash.
No problem. Thanks so much.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.